Ho ho ho! Welcome back to PSC Tech Byte. Today I am going to explain you how you can do the actual implementation of your code to consume MSAL to get an access token and later on consume Xcode to retrieve the result of an API. In order to do that, first of all, you will need to declare some global variables in your application in order to hold the MSAL references and the access token that you retrieve. Then you will have to implement the actual retrieval of the access token using either the retrieval of an interactive access token or a silently retrieval of a token, depending if you have already logged in your user and you have an access token in the cache or not. Once you have retrieved the access token, you can rely on a predefined structure to hold and deserialize the result of your graph request. And using the URL request object and a URLSession, you can then make an actual request to the Xcode graph, providing the access token. So let's move to the demo environment and let's have fun consuming Xcode graph in iOS. Ho 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 ho! So let's have a look to the application with the actual implementation of the code base consuming Xcode graph using MSAL to get the access token. And first of all, in the viewController.switch file, we need to define a few variables that will be used to hold, for example, the access token to consume Xcode graph, as well as the MSAL public client application that we will use to get an access token through MSAL, as well as some other types that we need for supporting MSAL, like the MSAL web view parameters instance and MSAL account to keep track of the current user account when the user is already authenticated, and we want to provide silent retrieval of the access token. There is also some plumbing about the UI, but I will not care about it. So in the view.did.load of our Swift view controller, we simply need the MSAL library in order to prepare it and to be able to get the access tokens. In the init MSAL method or function, we simply configure the authority based on the URL that we want to consume, as well as we create a configuration for the MSAL public client, and we create an actual instance of the MSAL public client application that we will use across the whole application, and specifically in the viewController.swift implementation. Then we simply define a function to retrieve the graph endpoint, which will be me/events under Xcode graph, because we want to get the list of events of the currently connected user. And then we can start thinking about how to invoke the Microsoft Graph API. As such, if we have an account already stored in the cache, we can simply get the access token silently. If not, we need to do it interactively, prompting the user to authenticate. And that's why we have a method, which I will not dig into, which will simply try to figure out if we have an account in the current application context. And if not, as I said, we will go through the interactive login process to authenticate the user and then get the access token. How do we do that? Well, we use the application context, and using the interactive token parameter for MSAL, we define the scopes, the permission scope that we are interested in, and we provide eventually that we want to select the account to use for authentication. And by doing that, then we call the acquire token method of the application context, and we get back an access token, hopefully as the result of the acquire token, and if not, we will show an error message accordingly to the exception. In the acquire token silently, on the other side, we already have a token in the local cache of MSAL, so we simply try to get it silently, and we use the acquire token silent method of the application context object, so of the MSAL object. And again, in case of any exception, we notify the user, and if everything will be okay, we simply get the access token from the result, and we store it in the global variable that we have in the viewController.swift, so that we are then ready to consume Xcode graph. How do we do that? Well, we need to get the endpoint we want to use, which is the function we saw before, and through which we define the /me/events endpoint. Then we get the access token and we set it in the authorization header of the request, of the URL request that we create right here for the URL of the graph that we want to consume. And then using the URLSession.share.dataTask, we provide the URL request that we want to execute. Again, in case of any issue, we provide an error message to the user. And if not, we are ready to decode the JSON response that we will get from Xcode graph into an actual array of objects. So we use the JSON decoder and we try to decode the response that we have got, and we use the JSON event variable that we retrieve from the data resulting from the request we made right here. And when we do the decode, we simply decode the result in a fully typed structure like this one that I defined, where I have the event response, which is a decodable one, so we can use the JSON decoder, and it will contain an array of value of type event, and every single event will still be a decodable type with these properties, which are the properties I'm interested in my scenario. And then I also have the start and the end date of the event, which are still decodable structures, defining the date and the time zone of the event. So by doing that, we can hopefully retrieve the number of events, and we can show the result in the UI of the application. So let me run the application and see how it behaves in the actual UI from an end user point of view. Here we are in the emulator, and soon we will be able to see the UI of the application in action. The application now is signed out, so we need to sign in. We can call the micrograph. We will have to consent the application to access the information needed. We will select the account as we choose in the code base of the application. This will be the account. I'm already authenticated in this session with this account, so I simply need to grant the permission to my application to access, and sorry for the Italian messages here, to access the target API. And once I've done that, you see I've got the access token, and right after that, I see that I have 21 events coming from Graph and available in my calendar. So really simple and straightforward. You simply need to write all of the plumbing to do all the actual retrieval of the access token and then invoking through the HTTP client the graph endpoint, providing the access token in the authorization header. Like always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week to keep on talking about how to consume Xcode Graph from iOS and Swift in Xcode using the Xcode Graph SDK library. But before closing this video, I would like to wish you a very Merry Christmas. Thank you. Ha 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 ha!